It is? Yes? Ah, very good. Oh, thank you, John. So, it's always an honor to be here, and, oops, mess with the keyboard here. Today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the 21st century poverty, and to kind of talk about it in the context of the political climate, what's going on across the river, and how Virginia intersects with that reality. Now, I have to say, this is a very different talk after Tuesday, okay? Let's just be real. Let's celebrate. Let's acknowledge that folks are waking up, that fear and anger are not the only response that we can have. It is possible to create a bit of hope and a bit of vision, and that what we see, what I saw in your Tuesday election was just that. Folks saying, no, let's engage. Let's not just destroy. Let's be in relationship. Because the challenge of democracy is democracy requires us to be community, to be connected. And this unpatriotic lie of individualism, that it's just me and my family, and I'm pulling up the drawbridge, is a myth perpetuated to control and to keep economic forces engaged in the process of democracy, and our voices not so much engaged. Now, John was just talking about all the work that you all have been doing on TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. That's really important work. But I want you to know that for the vast majority of low-income people, it is not available. It's important to make it better for the folks who can access it, but with lifetime limitations, with strict economic guidelines, with the limited amount of money that's available, the vast majority of low-income people do not receive any, zero cash assistance. 21st century poverty is a teeny little bit. It's estimated maybe about 10 to 15% of what would have been folks eligible for the old program when it was a program that anyone who was poor could sign up for, pre-1996 welfare reform. So it's about 15% of the folks that were eligible for that are currently receiving cash assistance nationally. And the same is true for Virginia. The truth of welfare reform was not that it helped people get, move up the ladder. It was a way to limit the number of people who received cash benefit. The truth is now that the majority of people in poverty, the story of 21st century poverty, is that they are primarily the working poor. Just about everybody has some small job and are making very minimal wages. A couple of years ago, I got to be only in D.C. Can you say this kind of thing? When I was at the White House in the Obama administration, I was at the signing of the executive order to raise minimum wage for the federal contract workers. And I was sitting next to a young woman in a beautiful blue dress, and she was so excited to be there because she'd grown up in Northern Virginia. She'd always walked by the White House. She never knew she could be in the White House. And she was probably mid to late 20s. And so she was taking a picture of the chair she was sitting in. And then she asked me to take a picture of her in her chair. And we got talking. And Robin told me that she worked full-time for a profitable clothing store chain. And she made minimum wage in Northern Virginia, $7.25 an hour. And then she told me that I commented on her dress, and it was this beautiful sapphire blue, and she said, oh, I got it with my employee discount. You know, it was on sale. I paid $23.42 for it. Isn't it beautiful? And since I like a bargain, I totally appreciated that. And then we talked some more, and then she said, you know, by looking at me, you know, I work full time, but by looking at me, you would never know I have to live in a homeless shelter because I can't afford rent in this area. The truth of 21st century poverty is that our wages do not match cost of living. And that we have consistently failed to update, to renew our perspective. And so while I commend SALT for working on TANF, because it's critically important, the fact is it touches a very small percentage of the population. A big part of the challenge is wages. And if we were serious about engaging the issues of poverty, we'd engage the issue of low wages also. Not either or, it's both and. So what do we see? Well, at our beloved organization network, what we see is this reality of 21st century poverty means that we've got to engage in some new ways, some new issues. And that at the federal level, what we see is the key driver of our income and wealth disparity, because it's clear the folks at the top seem to be getting further and further away, is the key driver is tax policy. Tax policy, and everybody's eyes glaze over. Okay, we've got this really big email list that we send out action alerts to, and you can figure out how, or somebody can, not me, but some of my staff knows how to figure out how many people open our email. We've had huge responses on healthcare, huge responses on immigration. Last week we sent out an alert on tax policy. We had the lowest ever because we know people say taxes, ooh, how boring is that? But what I want to lift up for you this morning is what Pope Francis says about taxes in Joy of the Gospel, paragraph 54. He says, some people continue to defend trickle-down economic theories. I don't know who that would be. I can take one or two. Put a few names on it. I think this is the Speaker Ryan paragraph. But anyway, okay, so he says, some people continue to defend trickle-down economic theories, which assume that economic growth, encouraged by a free market, will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This opinion, which has never been confirmed by the facts, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and in the sacred workings of the prevailing economic system. Meanwhile, the excluded are still waiting. This is the trouble. Trickle-down economics does not work. Has not worked for the 35 years that we've tried it. And you know what the definition of insanity is? Is when you keep repeating the same action over and over, but you expect a different result. So what we're saying, or what I'm saying, is it's up to us to break open and to look at what has happened. And what has happened with trickle-down economics is the shift of money to the top and the lack of increase in wages at the bottom. Now, we've been working on this, working really hard on this issue to deal with the issues of wages and taxation. And what I've heard, what I heard yesterday I was up in New York City. I was in the South Bronx at Mercy Center and got to meet with 12 moms who are, they were all immigrant moms most of whom are undocumented, here with their kids who are mixed status, meaning some immigrant kids, some citizen kids. And they were talking about how they were there because they work a night shift. All of them work a night shift in some various kinds of programs or employment. And their husbands were off at work. And this one mom said her husband works between 60 and 70 hours a week. Gets paid in cash. He makes 60 or 70 hours a week. He gets paid in cash, $450 a week. They have 3 kids in New York City, South Bronx. And they pay their taxes because they have an ITIN, the identification, tax number for identification purposes. They pay their taxes first. And what she was saying is they don't dare report the employer because then the employer would turn them in to INS. And they are subject to exploitation big time. In Chicago, we were at Arise, which is an employment law center for mostly for wage theft issues. And I met a woman who had been working, an immigrant woman who had been working 13 years in a year-round car wash in Chicago. Well, you can imagine what winter car washing would be like. And she was a detail person who drive the car and was in the out of doors and all this. Her employer had told her, minimum wage laws don't apply to immigrants. So she worked only for tips for 13 years until somebody got her connected with Arise, and Arise sued the employer, and she got 4 years of back pay. But only 4 years because there was a statute of limitations. So what I have come to learn is that in the immigrant community, there is a lot of labor exploitation. But what I have also come to learn is that there's a lot of exploitation in the citizen community as well. Because folks who have these low-wage jobs are seen as disposable, are seen as not engaged. So when I was in, I can see people, but I forget the place I was. Oh, when I was in Kansas City. In Kansas City, we met a guy, a citizen guy, who was working really hard, who was promised if he succeeded, he would get raises. But that period where he would get a raise from minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, kept getting further and further and further away. And he was unable to support his family. He didn't want to quit because of the promise. But yet, on the other hand, how long could he keep believing? Which then led me to say, those of us who are more economically secure, how do